Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are. Welcome to the EXIN BCS Expert Hour. Today we are over here with some of our best guests and speakers and specialists in SIAM to provide many different answers to you based on questions that were created in different perspectives of SIAM. So we would like to welcome you and wish you a pleasant session. So today, the webinar is going to be regarding to SIAM that is located in the business and intelligence and processes from the EXIN portfolio. And today, I'm Ademar Albertin, Product Owner at EXIN, and I'll be the moderator of the session. With me today, we're going to have Claire Agutter, Michelle, and Simon. Welcome to all of you. And before we start and let them to introduce themselves, I would like to let you know that unfortunately, Kevin Holland cannot make the session today. And then later in another time, we're going to schedule a new webinar with him. We are going to miss him over here, but I'm pretty sure and I'm confident that Claire, Michelle, and Simon, they are going to do a great job providing all the answers that you are aiming for. Along the session, you can send all your questions by using the questions tab located on the right side of the GoToWebinar menu. Along the session, I'm going to collect all your questions, and then in the end, I'm gonna answer. I'm gonna ask the questions to Claire, Michelle, and Simon. That they are gonna also answer your questions. So welcome again, Claire, Michelle, and Simon. I would like to let you to introduce yourself, starting with Claire.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us. My name's Claire Agutter. I'm Director at ITSM Zone, which is a service management e-learning company, and also at Scopism. And it's Scopism really that's relevant for this session, because it was through that company that we started to kind of create a standard document set for service integration and management. So through Scopism, I've had a chance to work with some brilliant industry practitioners like Michelle and Simon to try and document common practices for SIAM and create a body of knowledge that we can share right across the industry. And for those of you who perhaps haven't seen the SIAM body of knowledge yet, it is available as a free download at scopism.com, so you can always access it there.
Thank you very much, Claire. Michelle.
Hi folks, Michelle Major-Goldsmith from Kinetic IT in Australia. Much as it pains me to say, I've been in the industry for over 20 years, and with Simon, I was the lead architect for the Scopism Service Integration and Management professional body of knowledge. Thankfully asked by Claire to support her with, as she's already said, a cast of really fantastic people who gave their time freely to support what we were trying to achieve in codifying that. I've also worked directly with Claire and Simon and others on the Verizon publication, which has been exciting stuff as well, talking about service management for the digital age.
Thank you, Michelle. Simon.
Hello everyone, my name is Simon Dorst. I work with Michelle at Kinetic IT in Australia and done many of the same things with her. So to give it a different flavor, I'll confess that as a ITIL zealot of old, I was a bit skeptical at SIAM when I came across it at first, but I'm very happy to report, and I'm sure we're going to talk about it today, that I've seen the light and I've seen a lot of good use in not only the body of knowledge, but with many of our customers in Australia, how they have implemented or used some of the SIAM practices and theory.
Thank you, Simon. So now that all of you introduced yourselves, so let's start with the questions. So Claire, my first question is going towards your direction. So of course we are all curious about why did you decide to create a body of knowledge about SIAM? Because all of us heard about SIAM for many years already in the market, but we never had a body of knowledge about SIAM itself. And funny and good enough, your body of knowledge became recognized as the global standard that is being used worldwide. why did you do that? And how did you select authors and contributors to make that to happen and to become so big as it is right now?
That's it is a good question, and it really comes back to why I set up Scopism in the first place. So my background's always been service management, and when I started my career 20 years ago, there was really only ITIL and Prince2 that existed as kind of frameworks or methodologies that practitioners can use. And then what we've seen in the last, I guess, 5 to 10 years is an explosion really in new ways of working and new ways of managing IT services. And when I set up Scopism, my vision was for it to create resources that would help IT professionals stay current. So things are always changing. How do you keep on top of these new things? And SIAM was one of the ones that stuck out to me because it's related to service management. It was being quite widely adopted, but if you were a practitioner, you were curious and you Googled SIAM, you wouldn't really find very much information because a lot of the companies that were doing it were the really big service providers. So they were developing their own knowledge and their own collateral internally, but it wasn't really in their interest to share that with the wider marketplace. And again, there were quite a lot of government contracts that were based around SIAM, but they were only releasing small bits of information about what they were doing. So I thought, here's an opportunity to try and involve all of these organizations and kind of create a sort of a single combined view of SIAM that will be useful then for the organizations that are actually creating SIAM models, the service providers who operate within SIAM models, and of course service integrators themselves. So it seemed like a real opportunity to create something that would add some value to the service management community. And for me, I always have the opinion that these things are better coming from the community as well. So I could sit in a room on my own and you know, write my view of what SIAM looks like, but it's always going to be limited. We needed to have as broad a set of contributors as possible. So in terms of selecting the authors and contributors, how did I select them? To a certain extent, it was who would be willing to give up their time to the project. So they were self-selecting to a certain extent there. But really my goal was to try and get an author group which was from large and small organisations, public and private sector, different countries, different continents. And what that then allowed us to do was work as a group and create something that reflected everybody's experience. And we did have a few discussions, I guess we'd call it, within the author group, because people had different perspectives or different understanding of how things were because of their own experience of SIAM. And that was part of the process, really, was to try and bring that together and create something that would be helpful to everybody. So it was, you know, it was for me very much about, can we get as many people involved as possible to make this as useful as it can possibly be? And really, from my perspective, I'm still kind of humbled and hugely grateful to everybody who contributed, because some of the organisations that people said, you know, oh, they'll never get involved, big service provider, really commercial. So many organisations got involved, and people like Michelle and Simon have given days and days and days of their time to this. And for me, that's what's made it something that can become a global standard, because it reflects a global experience.
That's really nice to listen all the story behind the body of knowledge, because it's too simple to simply go to escopism.com and then just download the body of knowledge, but over there isn't a story behind the file. So usually we would say like the face behind the voice, but in this case I would say the
Yes.
story behind the file, behind the PDF file over there. And I have to say that I still remember the day that it was like at end of the day of a major working day that I was quite exhausted, and then I had a call with you to listen about what we were doing. And okay, what we're going to do together. Are we going to develop a certification? What are we going to do? And I say, my gosh, this is going to be a lot of work to make it done. Well, but congratulations, it's worth, I would say.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much. So let's go to our next question, and this is going to you, Michelle. The SIAM body of knowledge, we know now that is being very successful and is being used like in many different even continents. But somehow, since the first version was released, a new version now take place that it was launched now in 2020. But why that was needed? What changed from the first version to the second version? What was the main driver over there for this change? Can you say something about?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there were lots of reasons for it, and it wasn't that it had necessarily gone massively out of date, but we were very conscious about some quite significant changes throughout the industry and the practices and a number of different areas. And I guess the key to all of this was that we took the approach that the change actually needed to be a really valuable one, you know, adding to the fundamental SIAM principles and not change for change's sake. So this was an ethos that we agreed, and it prevailed over the approach to both the box. So certainly in foundation, the SIAM concepts and the core principles have remained the same, and we didn't want to have people in a position where they felt that they had to start over. So we intended it certainly to be a light touch update. So I guess our first consideration, and probably a huge one, was that, as Claire's already alluded to, our changing service management world was really quite considerable. So we wanted to acknowledge the high profile changes to service management best practice. There was the launch of Verizon in 2018, which I mentioned before, with its service management approach for the digital age, and certainly Simon, myself and Claire have been heavily involved in that, and many other fantastic contributors. But there was also the ITIL 4 update and an update to COBIT 2019, and there was other standards as well too. So I think we talked a lot about ISO 20000 originally, and we recognised that there were other standards that were really significant to SIAM, such as ISO 44001, which specifically requires identification and development and management of those more collaborative business relationships within or between organisations. So that really was fairly significant. Another thing was that we were asked, and we still are asked a lot, about how a SIAM ecosystem, which sort of deals with the importance of a robust governance framework and defined responsibilities, could be integrated with approaches like DevOps and Lean and Agile, which tackle the concept of governance quite differently. And when we consider DevOps, Lean and Agile, they focus on a number of concepts such as process automation, agility in build, test and release cycles, shorter sprints of activity. So it was slightly different maybe than what we talked about in the box. So from a SIAM point of view, some of those concepts and approaches, such as building a culture of collaboration between teams that historically had functioned in relative silos, wholly aligned with the SIAM focus, and we wanted to make sure that that was well understood. So getting the service providers to work effectively together, which is a massive challenge. I guess one of the things that we noticed from those newer practices was that their approaches suggest devolved responsibility, autonomy within the teams, decision making within the teams, and that can create a massive challenge for the service integrator and their function, whose role is really to manage to do the management, the assurance, the governance, integration and collaboration. So I guess if you look at that from the outside, you can see some degree of disconnect. So what we did was we tackled that with an updated description for these approaches in the foundation BOK, and we explored it in a lot more detail in the professional guidance, because we actually put a SIAM roadmap, or we put within the SIAM roadmap advice on the core considerations for making those practices work within the SIAM ecosystem at each of those stages. So we wanted to put some clarity around how each of those could work really, really well in a SIAM environment, because I guess many had thought that that wouldn't necessarily be the case. So if you haven't, I would absolutely encourage you to go and take a look. Foundation was a light touch. Professional, lots more detail at each of the SIAM stages that talks about how we can make those two, or those number of practices, work really quite successfully together.
Great. So basically, simple soul like me thinking now with your answer, I would say that one of the main things that have changed is about now SIAM has a better guidance about how to use, especially when it comes down to the professional body of knowledge that has more details. And also for organizations that are using new versions of the frameworks and approaches that are available in the market, like version, ITIL, COVID, it is already updated, so they are not going to lose time trying to think about how to adopt. You guys already covered that new frameworks and approaches over there in the new publication. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. And as I say, what we wanted to make sure it wasn't change for change's sake. So where we saw changes in those practices, we've applied them in the bodies of knowledge. And then where we've seen potential sources of disconnect between some of the modern service management practices and SIAM, we've pulled those threads together, and we've done it through the life cycle view, so that people can actually see, well, with each of these challenges, how would that be responded to at each of the stages. So hopefully giving that sort of life cycle view gives people an opportunity to see that it does work very, very nicely together. It's just about understanding what those threads look like to make it happen. So yes, it's all there. They don't need to go looking for it separately through the other practices.
That's very great, Michelle. Thank you very much for your answer.
Thank you.
Then, now, SIAM. Simon, sorry. The trainers, they are always an important part when it comes down to learning, development of ourselves, of our skills, competence, and so on. And always when I go to the training, I always like to connect myself to the trainer, because I know that from there I'm gonna get many more knowledge and information than usually I would get if I don't connect with the trainer. So I will see them as a good influencers in the classroom to the candidates itself. And we know that many of the trainers from the service management space, they are coming from the IT service management space. But I don't know if all of those trainers, they are ready to go to deliver, to prepare themselves to do something with SIAM or not, or if they would need to invest some time in relearning what SIAM is, or how to deliver the classrooms, what are the topics, do they can reuse the previous knowledge from other methodologies, frameworks, and approaches. How does it work with SIAM? Can you provide us a glimpse about how this works in the classrooms, or what should be the preparation?
I can certainly give it my thoughts. I like to start with the way the question is phrased. It's almost like a trick question, because everyone needs to invest in learning new subjects all the time. But specifically, we're talking here about SIAM training. And I think if we are talking about a facilitator-led classroom training, whether that is a remote classroom, virtual classroom, or an actual physical classroom, I think the trainer needs to be able to add something to the theory. So the bodies of knowledge and the syllabus are quite clear in what needs to be learned. But I think it's really important for a trainer to have preferably experience with the topic, or at least have a mastery to not only explain the theoretic concept of SIAM, but also some of the practical applications, successes, and pitfalls. And that means that we'll have to invest time in not only reading the body of knowledge, but perhaps talking to people that have done it, or getting some other experience around it. I think with that, at least in our experience, a lot of the candidates that come to the SIAM, particularly the SIAM Foundation training, they're at the beginning of their SIAM journey, and they don't necessarily work in an established SIAM environment in there, so they haven't got a lot of things around them to recognize in there. So it's a real important that the trainer sets the tone for these people and kind of helps them on their way to establishing a more structured SIAM environment in there. And if you are talking about the SIAM professional training, then of course candidates aren't looking for a regurgitation of the body of knowledge or even tips or tricks to pass the exam. People that come to the SIAM professional are really looking at some ready-to-use guidance in there. And we find that action-based gamification or scenario-based training is a fantastic tool, and it's certainly something that that we've applied in there. And we're actually hoping to do a SIAM professional train-the-trainer during the Service North conference in April to talk about those kind of action-based exercises that can make not only SIAM but the course come to life for those people inside.
Great. And then during the Service North event, so then with this TTT, for those trainers that would like to take SIAM on and start delivering classes with this TTT, they would be able to understand how to deliver, what the topics are, and how to better prepare themselves. Am I correct?
Yeah, I mean, we've got a fair amount of experience with delivering both the SIAM Foundation and professional training courses. So in the Train the Trainer, we hope to explain what the syllabus is and which elements are important, but we're also hoping to add our perception on the elements that candidates enjoy hearing about or that they struggle with, and also an element of practical experience that we have within our organization that we bring into the training, whether it is through an exercise or just an emphasis in the training, to just make sure that any training course is more than just a litany of theoretic concepts that has been it, but it's something that brings SIAM to life for the candidates.
That's great. That's great. I really hope that this would be successful, because it's gonna be April next year or March. I forgot already.
It's the end of it. Yeah, late in April, and it's going to be an interesting one because unfortunately we won't be able to all to get into the room, so we're going to do it in a remote way. But that's the way of the future, and we are actually at the moment, or we have done a lot of development in changing our training, because I'm a big fan of good old-fashioned classroom training. But we are now going using more and more the Zoom and the team solutions in there, and we've got some very creative solutions around those action-based exercises to still be able to bring a bit of activity and motion and energy into a classroom, even if it's not a physical classroom.
That's really great. I'm glad to hear that, Simon. Thank you. Then the next question. Now we're gonna have the three of you. We talked about like how SIAM started, then we talked about why the change for the new version, we talked about the importance of the trainers over there, but now let's talk about the market. How do you see SIAM in the market? Is it just a simple trend? Are there jobs available from organizations looking up for SIAM professionals? How do you see this? I will start with Michelle.
Okay, well, I'm not going to steal Claire's thunder because I think she can talk a lot about SIAM in the market, and we'll probably want to share some of the detail of her really fantastic work with the SIAM surveys over the past few years. But I guess one of the things I wanted to say that it definitely isn't a trend. And in fact, SIAM, I know as a concept, I was talking about this 20 years ago when I was working in the UK, and we weren't necessarily calling it SIAM, we were calling it things like multi-supplier integration, but the concept was there. And Claire alluded to it before. I think what the challenge was that there was a lot of information available largely within the bigger service providers, but what there wasn't was this opportunity to go to a source of information and be able to take the benefit of that unless you were working in one of those organizations. So I think the work of the SIAM architect team was to codify the knowledge and make it into some kind of best practice and unify understanding about the core concepts and principles and put some clarity around things like the drivers and the benefits for its adoption. So, you know, is it new? No. Has it taken root? Absolutely. Is it a trend? Well, no, I definitely wouldn't say it was a trend in a negative way. Is it going to get more and more buy-in in terms of the complexity of sourcing models today, and people saying that it's almost, you know, a case if you're going to use more than one service provider, then it is absolutely the way to go. So I'll hold it there because I don't want to take everybody's thunder, but that's just a few thoughts for myself.
Okay, Claire.
I agree with everything that Michelle has said, unsurprisingly. But one thing that is interesting to look at is the global market for SIAM, because we know through the work that we do at Scopism, we know from the people who come to the website and download the body of knowledge that there are big markets and a lot of interest in SIAM all across Europe, in India, in Australia, and also in Japan as well. Japan's a very strong SIAM market. The one area where we don't see as much interest in or awareness of SIAM is in North America, so Canada and the United States. And it's an interesting one, I think, because they still have suppliers, they still have outsourced IT services, they still have complex supply chains there. So I do expect to see the North America SIAM market growing over the next few years. And actually, we are aware through some of the work we've done at Scopism that there are several US government contracts at the moment that have been created with an RFP that includes provision of SIAM services. So there's some growth there. So it's definitely taken root, and you know, the complexity of our supply chains, especially for IT services, which is where we tend to see SIAM being adopted, that's not going to change. You know, we see no evidence that all IT services are going to come back in-house. So I do see the adoption of SIAM continuing to grow, and there are certainly jobs available for SIAM professionals. So again, you can sort of validate this by looking on job boards in your own area, but certainly the big service providers, so Atos, Capgemini, Tata Consultancy, Sopra Steria, CGI, to name but a few, have SIAM practices. Kinetic IT, where Michelle and Simon work, have a very strong SIAM practice. So there are certainly jobs available, but as Michelle was alluding to the Global SIAM survey that we do, one of the things that we don't seem to have in the industry at the moment is any kind of standardization around job titles. And I think this is something that happens right across service management. It's not restricted to SIAM specifically, but there's no kind of career path where you would start as a SIAM analyst or a SIAM junior and then progress through certain levels. When we ask people on the SIAM survey what their job titles are, we see very, very little standardization. But what we do see is a lot of seniority. We see managers, we see consultants, we see practice leads. So there's definitely a career path there for SIAM. But sometimes those jobs would not necessarily be advertised with SIAM in the title. I think that would be fair to say.
Thank you very much for all the insights. Simon.
Sorry, just had to get my mute off there. Yeah, I can tell from the Australian perspective and mirror what Michelle and Claire said, that these jobs have been around for a long time. It just wasn't called SIAM. So from ages ago, we did what people called things like end-to-end service management, where we maintain processes across multiple service providers. What we have seen, which is, as Claire told us, was the reason to write the SIAM body of knowledge and to create the SIAM accreditation with EXIN, is that the word SIAM now is used more and more. So in the last 4 years, we've seen organizations go to market asking for a SIAM provider, asking for SIAM services, or organizations that come to our training that are setting up a SIAM environment and a model within their own organization. So the word SIAM is now a more established word, and with that, there are also more jobs that contain service integration or SIAM specifically. But even if you're not using those words, it is almost unthinkable that an organization would have only 1 or 2 service providers. A decent sized organization has multiple service providers and therefore uses the concepts of SIAM. But I do have to say it was bordering on embarrassing, and I'm not going further than bordering, when we walked into one of our customers and there were literally a number of copies of the body of knowledge on various bookshelves, and it was actually very gratifying to see how people have taken those concepts to heart and are now actually putting them into the market, into the organization, and into the jobs.
Great, thank you very much, Simon. So resuming everything that you three said, there is a major market for SIAM. People are using SIAM even from the past without even know what it is SIAM, and then you guys could translate all the practices that were out there in the market to create a body of knowledge. Hasn't taken root. Yes. It is just a trend. Definitely not. Are there jobs available? Yes, but not as a standard. There is no SIAM Junior, SIAM Senior, but the professionals that are working with SIAM, they are more seniors. They are consultants, managers, and so on. Is it correct, this resume from all your comments?
Yeah, sounds pretty good to me.
Yep.
Okay, great. So let's move forward for our next question. That is connected as well with the global survey that was performed by Scopism. That if any of you that is watching us never heard about the global survey that is performed by Scopism, it's the most and only and most respected. Is the most respected publishing regarding to SIAM worldwide. And Scopism, that is the company that Claire created back then to create a body of knowledge of SIAM. Every year they are conducting this survey with many responses from people from everywhere in the world. And recently they just shared the last version of the survey. And then I would like to ask you, Claire, can you share a little bit more about the main outcomes that you found over there in the survey, so we can
Yep.
update our audience regarding to what SIAM's looking like?
Yep, absolutely. We've been doing the global SIAM survey for 3 years now, which is nice because it means we've actually started to build up a little bit of a history. We can start to see trends. Again, you can access these documents on the Scopism website in the free download section. The first year the survey was sponsored by For Me, and the second year Kinetic IT very kindly sponsored it, and then this year For Me again. So we're really grateful to those companies for helping us to bring this information to the market. Each year we've had more and more responses to the survey, which again is nice because it makes the survey findings more credible. And this year we had more than 40 countries responding as well, which kind of reinforces the sort of the global perspective that we have of SIAM adoption. There's a lot of information in the survey. We do ask people about whether they're currently planning to adopt SIAM, or whether they are already using SIAM, or whether they're an organisation that sells SIAM consultancy and SIAM services as well, because we get some of those. But a couple of the things that were interesting for me this year, one of these comes back to what Simon was saying about maybe organisations are doing SIAM but they're not calling it SIAM, and we ask the question, what services are in scope for your SIAM model? Is it just IT services? Is it a mixture of IT and non-IT services, or is it non-IT services only? And I guess this gives us a feel for how organisations are maturing and the impact of digital transformation, because it's becoming more and more challenging in a lot of organisations to say, you know, where does IT stop and the business start? So I'm hoping in the future this question will be almost meaningless, because we'll be talking about organisational products and services. But this year we had, for the organisations planning to adopt SIAM, we had 58% of them were going to apply the SIAM model to IT services only, 40% a mixture of IT and non-IT. But then for the first time, we had some respondents, and it's only 2%, so we're only talking about a small amount, but organisations that said they were applying SIAM to non-IT services. And I think this is an important evolution for SIAM, because it's come from the IT industry. It's primarily used in the IT industry, and there's, you know, the principles of SIAM are generic, so they should absolutely be extended and applied across the organisation. One of the other things that I found quite interesting as well, and this reflects the finding from previous years, is about the level of training that organisations provide to their staff. There were a lot of organisations, 64% of those planning to adopt SIAM, said they hadn't done any training, which, if we look at this from an organisational change management perspective, seems phenomenal. Adopting SIAM is a big change. Sometimes people's roles change. Sometimes people move to a different organisation as part of the SIAM adoption. So the idea of doing that with no training taking place does seem like you're almost setting yourself up to fail. So that one was very interesting to me. You know, not even necessarily saying that people must take the SIAM Foundation or professional, but even some in-house training or some awareness sessions would provide some benefit there. But there's an awful lot of good information in the survey, and it does cover demographics. So if you are thinking about a career in SIAM, there is information in there about kind of industry average pay bands, job titles, where people are based. So I would recommend you download that and have a look. But I know Michelle and Simon, you were both very involved with the survey. Was there anything else that stood out for you this year?
I've not got the numbers to hand, Claire, but I think what's always interesting is just the changes in the rationale for people adopting SIAM, or for organisations adopting SIAM. So, you know, certainly we've seen originally conversations around a need to do more outsourcing, and then there was getting value from the service providers, and then there was this talking about the collaboration challenge and so on. So, I mean, these things are interlinked, but it's quite interesting to watch over the 3 years how they've evolved and changed. And I think when you start to then map it back to some of the other questions, it becomes really interesting. So when we talk about the collaboration challenge, it's recognised as being a major challenge for most organisations. And then in the same breath, questions are asked about tooling and, you know, obligations to thinking about how tooling is going to support it. And quite often there's been no thought around the investment and the challenges there. So it sort of goes hand in hand, because you think, okay, so if that whole tooling and collaboration piece hasn't been thought about, you can understand why you know, the service providers are finding it difficult to work together and to collaborate in the way that we'd like them to do so. So Yeah, as you say, Claire, it's really a good idea to have a proper look, because there's so much information in there. And as I say, you can start to draw the themes and see, you know, well, if that's happening, I can understand why this is a challenge over here, and so on. So yeah, that was it for me.
Yeah, and hopefully, you know, with the body of knowledge and with the survey, there's an opportunity for organisations to learn from the challenges that other organisations have faced, rather than having to go through all the pain themselves. If you can see in the survey, for example, you know, some of the most frequent challenges or the timescales that people are expecting, if you're embarking on a SIAM project yourself, then that's absolutely something that's going to help you and help you be prepared for the challenges that you're going to face.
Great, but I'm still missing just one simple information, Claire.
Mm-hmm.
Where can I download the SIAM Global Survey?
It's on scopism.com and it's in the free download section. So you'll find the one from this year, 2019 and 2018 in there as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. So, Michelle, let's go back to one of the things that I think you tapped into the subject, that in the past we were talking about SIAM, referring about this as just a supplier management. Is it the case?
This is one of the anecdotes, or one of the suggestions that we hear a lot, amongst others, like, oh, SIAM is just end-to-end service management and so on. But yeah, it's just supplier management is something that you hear talked about. And I've already mentioned it, the SIAM survey year on year has basically noted that SIAM is being adopted in the hope of better performance from suppliers. So, you know, it makes sense, it's related, absolutely, because SIAM certainly helps, but SIAM isn't about managing by contract, and that's a really important piece. And in fact, to the contrary, so whilst we like, you know, we prefer the idea of having SIAM-based contracts where there's obligations between the service providers to do things to ease the journey, the end-to-end journey, and how they collaborate with each other, it's less about managing contracts and it's more about fostering relationships. And it's about end-to-end service outcomes, and it's about collaboration and communication and innovation and team culture. So all those amazing words. Now, if it was just supplier management, it would be managing discrete siloed contracts. And what would be the point? So, you know, it is much, much more than that. I think the service integrator function wouldn't really be contributing any real value to the customer. The customer might as well just do that themselves if that's the case. So I think one of the key points is that SIAM incorporates those functional elements, and that's a weird statement, but what we mean by that is it's the decision-making boards, it's the process forums, it's a working group where the layers of the SIAM ecosystem, like the customer, the providers, and the integrator, can actually work together. And that's above and beyond any contractual commitment. So it's an opportunity to share and be part of that whole team ethos. So SIAM gives us opportunities to think about artifacts that will help, like charters and operational agreements and collaboration agreements that help the providers understand and develop mechanisms so that they can work more productively together rather than in isolation, which of course means better outcomes for the customer, and that's what we want. So even if somebody did think that it was just about supplier management, it definitely isn't that straightforward. I guess another point is, if you look at traditional service management, where we consider things like service level management and supplier management and contract management and performance management as very separate things. And in a SIAM environment, you sort of have to break this up, because these elements fall to either the customer or you know, the service integrator. So they both have a role to play in each of those. And this is where it gets really interesting, because much of the challenge comes about because the customer still owns the contracts. They own the legals, they select the service providers, they own the financial elements. You know, they source the providers, they negotiate the contracts, they sign on the dotted line, they pay the bills. But the integrator essentially has to take on the voice of the customer in managing the day-to-day service delivery elements. So here we're talking about things like relationship management and performance management and so on. So despite this, we often get the situation where the customer can't disengage. And they need to understand where their role is in that, because we're still looking to them from the service integration function to manage things like if we have to move into the area of financial penalties or terminations. So I guess that the dynamic is quite considerable, and that's why mapping out roles and responsibilities becomes really, really important, because you've got a range of roles: supplier level, service level, contract management, the legal obligations, that all need to be considered. And you have to work out, okay, so what does the customer need to do and what does the integrator need to do? So it isn't straightforward, and I guess it's understanding that if we just thought about it as supplier management, we'd be setting ourselves up for a fall. So there's a range of responsibilities that fall into all of the areas, but specifically the customer and the service integrator, that goes way past just that traditional supply management kind of role.
Thank you very much for your explanation, Michelle.
No problem.
Then the next question: is SIAM only useful for IT sourcing, or the principles can be applied to any other area of the organization? I would like to start with Simon.
I think Claire already said that we see this movement of people using SIAM for non-IT services, which is very natural, because that's where organizations are going to these days. It's enterprise service management or a digital organization where IT is just an element of it. And we actually have very deliberately avoided the use of IT in most of the SIAM body of knowledge to make sure that the concept is generically applicable, and that's something you see in other practices like Verism as well in there. So no, you can very much use SIAM in any other part of the business. And in fact, I think it would even be better if the business can be seen as a whole organization rather than having the IT doing some separate things in some dark corners with some magic.
Great. Claire, Michelle, do you agree with Simon?
Yeah, I absolutely do, and like Simon mentioned there, the idea of an IT service is, from a business perspective now, is becoming less and less distinct. But the trends that I see in organisations are far more outsourcing right across the enterprise. So if we think in terms of maybe workflows or value streams, instead of thinking in terms of services, we can start to see how SIAM applies right across the organisation. So if we take recruitment and onboarding as an example here, so a friend of mine has just been offered a job at a very large organisation, and the job advert and the initial vetting were done by an outsourced organisation. Then the interview was done by a different outsourced organisation. Her references were then checked by another separate organisation. Once she starts in that role, some of the equipment that she gets issued will come from yet another organisation. So you can absolutely see, if you look at that from the enterprise perspective, applying service integration and management thinking so that all of those service providers were working together to deliver value will absolutely create benefits. And again, it comes back to other organisations doing SIAM, but perhaps not calling it SIAM. And I suspect that there absolutely are, and it's how we reach that audience and show them the content of the body of knowledge without perhaps putting them off with a scary long title for it.
That's great.
Yeah, I don't think there's much to add to that. I think Claire and Simon have done a really good job, but I did want to just sort of make a statement as something we talked about when we were doing the development of the body of knowledge, and something to think about. We actually talked about the idea of having an integrator of integrators. So again, that's looking to that enterprise-wide piece where we could see a situation where we have a number of service integration functions across the enterprise. So I don't have any answers or useful information to say, but it was just a discussion point, and we sort of saw that something could be evolving in that space.
Great. So next question, Simon. When it comes down to SIAM implementation, the challenges can be very different from organization to the other. But are there critical factors or common pitfalls when implementing SIAM that you could give at least a heads up to the audience?
Yes, I can. We actually have very deliberately, when we wrote the foundation body of knowledge, we didn't want it to make it sound like a silver bullet that would solve all your issues, make a cup of tea and do all the other things you wanted it to do. So in the foundation body of knowledge, there are very specific challenges referenced, and also some tips how people can approach those challenges and minimize them or overcome them in a particular organization. And in the professional body of knowledge, we have also put a lot of advice in there, and sometimes the advice or the real life story is actually something where it didn't go right, in the hope that people will learn from that. But if I had to pick one thing that I think is one of the main pitfalls, it's that people will underestimate the true nature of a SIAM environment. Having that cooperative end-to-end focus on outcomes rather than having that governance framework around contracts in there. And organizations need to understand, particularly if they're outsourcing the service integrator, that a lot of this actually comes from the customer retained capability. We do see in our own organization with our customers or our prospective customers sometimes an attitude of, oh, if I outsource the service integration, it's not my problem anymore. And I think that is a pitfall, that people do not define the customer retained capabilities and the role of the customer in setting up the organizational change management around a SIAM environment. There's still a lot of underestimating what SIAM is.
Great. Thank you very much, Simon. Now, before to ask this question to you three, it will be because we have one more question to go before to take a look on the audience questions. But I would like to ask you to be as much as concise as you can, because we're running out of time already, and I don't want to skip the chance of the audience to ask you questions. Okay. So the question 9 is, more traditional ITSM professionals that could use a supplier management process to unite multiple processes might say to you, I don't need SIAM. What would be the value of SIAM for these professionals? Michelle.
Yeah, I think I largely answered that to a degree in terms of trying to sort of explain the difference between supply management and SIAM. So we could go through a million different positives, I guess, in terms of why SIAM is important. So I think remember that we've got a massive degree of complexity in most provider models these days, and SIAM will bring all kinds of different things. So it's not just about the end-to-end service management, it's about the opportunity to create collaborative environments where people start to innovate. There's a whole host of different things that I think quite often are not necessarily recognized, and I would encourage people to go and have a look and look at the true benefits of SIAM, because if you think it's just about supplier management and end-to-end service management, it is far, far more than that, and it can help you with all kinds of elements, such as sort of doing your sourcing correctly and making sure that you can decouple service providers because you set them up in a certain way. So, we could talk about this forever, but conscious of the time, I'll give somebody else a shout at that.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Simon.
Sorry, mute button again. Look, yeah, I think I planted in the beginning as an ITIL zealot from old. I was kind of that skeptical with this thing in there, and my learning would be that what SIAM adds that you don't find in any of the other practices is that structure around the role of the integrator in there. So there's a lot of good stuff in SIAM about collaboration and end-to-end outcomes and organizational focus, improvement, innovation even, that you do find in other practices as well, but it really adds the role of the integrator, the governance around it, as a unique element, and that is something you do not find in supplier management, which is often focused on supplying or managing a supplier rather than that whole environment in there. So in short, that is my answer, the structure around the integrator.
Thank you very much, Cyan. Claire.
Again, briefly, you can have as many perfectly managed suppliers as you like, and they will deliver a good service. But how nice would it be if they were all actually working together and focused on innovation and improving things overall, not just on meeting contractual targets?
Thank you very much for all your answers. And then we are moving forward to our last question, and then I'm going to follow exactly the order that we did before, exactly as the order of the pictures of you guys. So Claire, why should organizations invest in SIAM?
Because everybody now has a complex supply chain, and they need to be able to ensure that they get maximum value from the investment that they make in services. And I think if this year's shown us anything, it's the importance of having a supply chain that you can rely on, and having suppliers that you have a good relationship with, who will collaborate together to deliver something when the situation is challenging.
Michelle.
Yeah, I think the proof of the pudding is in the eating, and I think you essentially have to look at some of the challenges that have been not eradicated but supported through using SIAM as a really effective tool. For real specific information about those customer challenges and why customers have looked to SIAM, I would really encourage you to go and look at a couple of white papers that Kinetic IT has sponsored. Where we essentially give some real life case studies of customer challenges, and what the SIAM model and the ecosystem did to support those challenges. So take a look. Practical advice is key here, but it is about focusing on those very specific business challenges that Claire has alluded to come about when you have this degree of complexity and you don't have any contractual commitments with service providers to work together, and they have no willingness to do so because you haven't created an environment that makes them understand that contribution to business outcomes.
Simon.
Yeah, little to add, but I won't let that stop me. I think the question shouldn't be why should an organization invest in SIAM, but how should they invest in SIAM? Because undoubtedly they have an environment with multiple providers that are somehow working together. In other words, they already have a SIAM environment. They just need to maybe invest a bit more in the structure, the governance, the ways of working, and the culture around it to achieve that flexibility that has been so important in the last year and true business outcomes.
That's really great. Thank you very much for all your answers. So now I'm gonna move forward for the questions of the audience. And before we go to this session, I would like to tell you and explain to you that the EXIN BCS SIAM program, it is available already since the Body of Knowledge was launched for the very first time. And then the certification scheme is based on the foundation that tests the knowledge and understanding of the basic terminology and core principles of SIAM. And then in the professional level of the certification, that comes down to the EXIN BCS SIAM Professional certification, test the ability of the candidates to analyze the SIAM concept based on scenarios and real life examples. So if you are willing to understand a bit more about SIAM, so you can access the escopism.com website and then take a look on the body of knowledge that is already available. And then if you decide that SIAM, it is your thing, so then don't hesitate to go for the certification. And then for more information, exin.com webpage is available for you. So before to say thank you for to listen, then now we are going to take up your questions. So if you have any questions, please use the questions tab from the GoToWebinar and start typing it. So I'm just taking the first one over here. Simon talked about the need for practical knowledge and experience, and not just ability to pass a purely theoretical multiple question exams. Have you considered changing the exam format or perhaps expanding them to a master level to focus more on this practical dimension, similar to Idolmaster or probably a neo digital thing? Actually, the profession, this I'm gonna answer because this is from the certification exam, and then I'm pretty sure how to answer this. The certification of the professional level is based on scenario based, and then also contains like a real life situations over there, so it's not simply theoretical. You need to have like a rational or analytical over there. You need to put yourself in certain situations before to answer the question, so it's kind of different because of the Bloom levels of the certification. So then the next question, what is the link of SIAM with ITSM tools deployment product implementation? Any of you would like to take up this question?
I think it's volunteers taking a step back here. As per always, tools, or at least from as per always, that's from my perspective, you need tools, but tools shouldn't lead what you are doing. So in a SIAM environment, we are talking about integration. So undoubtedly, different providers will be using different tools as much as you don't want that. So something to consider in the tooling strategy, which is an artifact that makes part of the SIAM model, is how are you going to integrate the different providers, and how are you going to deal with non-compliant service providers that don't integrate, that don't provide the similar reports in, and think of a cloud based provider or something along those lines in there. So I'm not sure whether that's right answering the question, but tooling is a very important consideration. It is a complex environment, and without tools, it's really, really hard to integrate.
Thank you very much.
I would just add to that, there is some guidance in the body of knowledge, because there's different approaches you can take to tooling in a SIAM environment, and some organizations opt to implement a tool and then require all service providers to use that tool. Others look at building integration between different tool sets, and there's some really good solutions there. So there's kind of different approaches that you can take, and it will depend on the model, the service providers involved, which one is most appropriate in each scenario.
Thank you very much. Then my next question is, if I were to do a SIAM transformation project, what are the key metrics or measure to see my SIAM success?
I was again waiting for someone else to jump in there. It is a very good question, because service management in general, but a service integrator or SIAM is making other things work better. But how do you measure whether that works better or not? So surely performance is one of the things. So providers providing the service that they were contracted to do, which is back to that supplier and contract management, you would see less issues. So we still find in the global survey that getting better performance out of providers, and we hear from our customers that having issues with providers is a big driver. And so you should see less of that, more compliance around it. But really starting measuring that culture, that relationship, that willingness to go above and beyond, and again, something that we've seen in the last couple of months, that is really hard to measure. And I don't have a specific answer, but I do have experience with a number of our customers where they developed a SIAM dashboard that is measuring not so much customer satisfaction, but more kind of provider satisfaction, to keep an eye on almost like the health of the environment and how the different providers feel working within there.
Yeah, you need metrics that are going to support the outcomes that you were hoping to get. So one of the things that organizations have to be very clear on is why they're adopting SIAM in the first place. And one thing that does seem to come as a surprise to a lot of organizations is they adopt SIAM in order to cut costs, and are then, you know, a bit shocked to find out that actually adopting a SIAM model comes with costs. There might be costs associated with the service integrator. There might be some staffing costs, costs associated with changing some of your service providers and the contracts that are associated with them. So be very clear and be realistic about what it is that you're hoping to achieve, and then, you know, picking that balanced set of metrics that's going to demonstrate that.
Thank you for your answers. Then my next question, and I'm really sorry because in this question there is a concept, a word that I never heard before. So I'm sorry if I pronounce wrongly, okay? So how has plug and play IPAAS make sense to you guys? IPAAS affected SIAM, and how do you see future demands? If you don't know this concept, then I can ask further questions, more clarification about what it is about, but I never heard of before.
Integration platform as a service. Thank you, Google.
Yes.
So, a suite of cloud services enabling development, execution and governance of integration flows connecting any combination of on-premises and cloud-based processes, services, applications and data. So this isn't something I've specifically come across before. It certainly, just looking at it very briefly, seems like something that would have an application in a SIAM environment. So I will read up on that. One thing that we did talk about as part of the body of knowledge refresh was the fact that many organizations now are using cloud services like AWS and Azure as part of their IT sourcing environment, and that creates challenges because those providers will not necessarily be tailoring service levels to meet your needs, will not be turning up to any of your process forums. So there's some guidance on that in there. But this, again, looking at this very briefly, this seems like technology catching up with the kind of the SIAM way of thinking. So if this can automate some of the integrations that are required, then it can only be a good thing.
Yeah, I don't know if I've got the same Google, but I haven't heard of it before, so it's certainly not a big thing at the moment, not in our side of the world. I do see it as a technology development, and I think what we're seeing, and we've seen it over a number of years, is that a level of technology is becoming commoditized, and if it's a commodity, then the need for SIAM is kind of less in there because it's a black box and it doesn't really matter and it just fits in there. But it does allow us to then look at the things that aren't commodity anymore. And there's always things in an organization that are not commoditized. And we are looking at those value streams in the organization rather than the technology. So I think something like this IPAAS and some of the other things in there is commoditizing technology, but it doesn't really take the need away for SIAM to integrate a service and achieve an outcome rather than just having some things with lights on.
Yeah, just one thing to add there. We did focus on what we refer to as a non-conformance service providers, and it doesn't mean that they're not playing by the rules, but you know, as we've alluded to there are commodity service providers more and more. The expectation is that they're not going to necessarily fall into line and listen to everything that's being said and so on, but we need to find a way to capture their contribution and their way of working within the SIAM ecosystem. So, you know, we've talked about it in the body of knowledge. It's definitely in there to go and have a look at about how we can plug those gaps. But I think it's more about recognizing there's some providers where you don't need to know the absolute ins and outs of everything they're doing, but you need to know sort of how they interface without knowing the detail of some of that, the stuff that makes them specialists. So recognize that not everybody's going to be on the same page and conformance to the model in exactly the same way, but knowing that there are going to be these sort of disconnects and finding a way to plug them and to bring the understanding of what they do into the model is the most important thing.
Thank you very much for all your answers. The last question that was dropped, it was about the TTT. And then I informed by typing over here that the information regarding to the TTT to access iscopism.com, and then over there go to the tab events, and then over there you can find the Serves North event, and then you can drop your question regarding to the TTT to the Iscopism website and Teams as well. Am I correct, Claire?
Yeah, contact@scopism.com is the email address that the website will send your question through to. So if you're interested in attending the trainer, if you drop an email to contact@scopism.com, once we've finalised the information, we'll be sending that out to everybody.
Great. So for now, I think we are good to go. So I'd like to say thank you to Simon, Michelle, Claire. Thank you very much to be connected with us and to be delivering this amazing and important content to our community. To our attendees, I also would like to say thank you very much to be with us and to be registering this webinar. We are looking forward to see you in next sessions. This session is being recorded, and you are gonna receive the recordings really soon. Okay, so guys, thank you very much to be with us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye bye.